morning.
Good morning.
Good morning.
Good morning. Good morning. Good morning. Hello, Danielle. How's your day going? It's pretty good so far. I don't know what this voice is. It's kind of like Marcel the Shell, maybe?
Yeah, or that Ryder voice that he did the other day. What was that one?
Oh, what was it?
You were like, oh, I really like that voice.
I know. I feel like it was something like, I'm a pothole, but it wasn't that voice. I don't remember.
Oh, man. Poor Ryder. He's never going to hear his compliment for his voice.
It'll come to me.
Welcome to What the Hell is Water. I'm Reed Garcia, founder of Helpful for Life.
I'm Danielle Garcia.
And this is episode 55. Today is December 16th, 2021, which is a Thursday. Thirsty Thursday, Throwback Thursday.
What are we going to do today?
Thursday. I don't know. There's a lot of things we could do on Thursday. Thimbles.
Always a great option.
Thumbs. I'm trying to think of other things that start with the.
TH?
I think I'm out. The Thursday.
Mm-hmm.
Well, yesterday we had a lovely co-host stand in for Ryder. Danielle is much, much greater than Ryder. And, oh, hello, Danielle. How's it going?
Well, you know, when you give me a title like that, I guess I'll come back.
Oh, good. You know, bribery at its finest. And so we had Danielle on yesterday. We talked about a handful of different things. Danielle, do you would you like to recap, or would you like me to recap?
I can do a very quick recap. So we talked about blue hair and Taylor Swift and witchy things and Pittsburgh, and when we went to the Mattress Factory Museum. What else? Was that everything?
Talked a little bit about journaling.
Yes.
But yeah, that's pretty good.
Cool.
Yeah, I mean, you got pretty much all of it. Well done. And then for our challenge.
Oh, man. What was the challenge?
Oh, you're
My mind
doing
just
so
went
well.
blank.
Just like think of, if you couldn't think of the whole challenge, maybe think of just like a piece of it. Like just like a chunk that makes up the larger challenge. Let's get to the root of it.
Oh, yes. STEM words.
There you go. Danielle,
we go.
You've now passed your pop quiz.
Wonderful.
Congratulations. Good morning.
Oh, so I have to stay?
Yeah, so yesterday our challenge was around STEM words, which could also be known as root words. And we had brought those up a couple times on the show, and Danielle and I learned about them when we were growing up in school, and we found them very useful, even in our adult lives. You know, that classic phrase people say when they're in school, like, when am I ever going to use math? Or when am I going to use this in the real world? Mm-hmm. That's how I sounded, at least.
Probably.
But with stems, I feel like that's one of the things we learned that we used a lot.
Yeah, when I forgot that they were, I guess a lot of them were Latin stems. And from the list that I just looked up, it's like LUM, which means light. So loom is light. And then you can learn Harry Potter spells because like lumos means like light. So a very, I guess that's not real world application. That's fantasy world application, but.
Well, if you need another excuse, like, hey, there you go, learn.
Yeah.
And it's not just Harry Potter. I mean, a lot of made up words and fantasy things often are based loosely in some real world. So that is another good benefit of doing it. If you ever plan on doing anything hyper technical, you know, whether you're being a doctor or some sort of scientist or engineer or anything that involves big words, that comes very valuable. That's why a lot of doctors learn Latin to help deal with all those terms. But yeah, so our challenge yesterday was for those of you for everybody, but especially for those of you who have not previously engaged with this idea of STEM words or root words, was to go look at that a little bit, and maybe that could be as simple as just picking a word and figuring out what its stems are, and then now you know. Or it could be something like going in and looking up a list of these popular stems, and maybe you could even start trying to learn some of these things. And we haven't looked it up to see exactly what all is out there, but we just did a quick search. And what did you were the one who did that, right? What did you find?
Yes. So the distinction that they talked about being between root words and stem words, root words are any word or part of a word that has like the inherent meaning, like the base meaning. So some root words can stand on their own, like act, to take action or whatever. Like, but act is also a word, but it can come at the end of another word. And then they talked about root words as stems for other words, and those are the root words that can't stand alone. So they're stems of bigger words. So that would be like loom for light.
LUM.
Yeah.
So you're saying that the root words can stand by themselves.
Not all of them. It's
Not
like
all of them,
it's like
but
a
some
square
of them.
rectangle thing. So the rectangle is the root words, and some root words are simply stems of bigger words.
Gotcha.
Whereas some root words do stand on their own.
So, for example, there's a word act, which is at the top of this page, and I'll include this in the chat. It's examples.yourdictionary.com/examples of root words with some dashes in there. So, act. Like, oh, I'm doing an act, or that is a root word, because it could also be something like action or activity. Mm-hmm. And so that's one example. And so this website kind of gives you a handful of these root word examples and some of these stems, and it tells you what they are. And so if nothing else, go take a look. Even if you haven't done our challenge yet from yesterday, go take a look at this page and just kind of read through them. Another thing, if you want to start taking it kind of more seriously and get a little bit more out of it, what you could start doing is you can create a list of these things and you can start memorizing them. And you could use a technique called spaced repetition. And there are a lot of tools out there that can help you do that. If you just give it a quick Google spaced repetition app or spaced repetition website or whatever. Basically what it is I'll just real quick describe what spaced repetition is because it's one of the things, I think we mentioned this when we were talking about language the other day, about how, at least back in my day, whenever we were in high school learning languages, the way they taught languages was a certain way. And since then, it's at least become more widely known. I don't know if it's, considered like the gold standard or not yet, but I've certainly have read about a lot of people who use these techniques to learn languages faster and better. And one of the techniques they use is something called spaced repetition. It's a memorization technique. And what that is you could start out just in the regular old school non-digital world with, think about a note card. And you have a note card and you write act on it. Mm-hmm. And then on the back you write the definition of what that is.
Yeah.
And then you have a stack of these, right? And so you look at it on day one and you read it and you give yourself the test. Did you pass? No? Put it back in the box. If you did pass, well, now you take it from level 1 to level 2. And then the next time you do it, you still pull all the ones from level 1. And then every other day you pull from level 2. And then if you pass level 2, you push back and you go to level 3. But if you fail, you got to go all the way back to level 1. Well, level 3 is then every third day. Or level 4 is once a week. Level 5 is once a month. And so what happens is the amount of time that goes in between when you're quizzed or you're tested on this knowledge, it is spread out. And it goes longer and longer and longer. And the exact intervals I just made up off the top of my head. I don't know exactly what the ideal ones are or whatnot. But the idea is that you'll go further and further spaced apart. And at some point, it'll be like a month or 6 months or something like that. And then if you remember it, it's like, I think I've got a pretty good grasp on this thing. Yeah. But if you don't, it goes all the way back to number 1. And so it kind of helps train your brain in this way to help you remember things better and faster. And now, given that it's 2021, you could use digital tools that do all of this work behind the scenes for you. So you don't have to worry about what buckets are where and all that kind of stuff. You just open it up, you do your little test on your phone or your computer, and you can do it for 5-10 minutes, and then you'll be done. It doesn't have to be a big deal. It could be while you're, sitting on the toilet or, waiting in line or whatever.
Yeah, I feel like Duolingo uses some form of that methodology with how they teach languages. And yeah, I was thinking while you were talking, and it sounded like maybe this, what's it called?
Spaced repetition.
Spaced repetition. Is that like a way to fast track something into long-term memory?
Yeah.
Or like optimize storing as long-term memory?
I think both of those things are true. I don't have the papers and the science right in front of me right now, but I know that I've certainly read and heard a lot about people who use this technique, and some people who use this technique to learn entire languages like much faster than for example, for us, I was like, oh, I took Spanish 1, and that was an entire year, then 2, then 3, and I took 3 years of Spanish, and realistically still needed a lot more for it to be very useful. It was a great base for me to stand on, and I learned a lot. But that was over 3 years versus some people using these types of techniques. It's like within a couple months, like they're conversational, yeah, and to like a good extent. And the other nice thing about choosing to do this type of thing now is you get to choose what you study, and that's a big difference, right? So like whether it's these STEM words or whether it's learning a new language or whatnot.
Tarot cards.
Yeah, tarot cards. It's like why that was a big like switch for me. And once I got out of college, I know people are gonna be really surprised. I've always been a bit of a nerd, always really enjoyed learning, been curious. But there was a bit of a switch after I got out of college, and because up to that point, like even though I was the one who chose my major, and I was the one who chose, like in high school, we get to choose a handful of electives and things like that. You get a little bit of choice, but there's still this pretty rigid structure of what you got to choose. And when you're graduating college, it's like, well, you need to have X amount of hours from here, and then this, and then this, and you get this much wiggle room. And just realistically speaking, unless you're going to add extra time to your college, you don't get to add that many electives, if you will. While you're there. So the nice thing about after college was that switch for me where it's like, hey, I get to learn about whatever it is I want. And also if I want to stop, I can stop. And so that was kind of a cool thing for me as an adult. It was like, and now it's like I'm choosing to learn this, and I'm choosing to go to school. And I've heard many people say to me and on other podcasts and stuff like that too, but also just in real life, been like, yeah, I wish I was in college now, now that I've like been through life a little bit, and I can choose something that I want to do and actually be really determined on it and all that kind of stuff. Instead of, especially for some people, like maybe not party quite as hard, but that all makes people who they are. Right. So yeah, that's the recap of our challenge yesterday, and then just a little bit of a tangent on what spaced repetition is for those of you who have not heard of that before. So yeah, any other thoughts from yesterday?
Oh, just that we had some synchronicities occur.
Yes.
Later on in the day after we were talking about what synchronicities were.
Yes, although I don't know if we ever really defined synchronicity.
No, we just gave my little God wink definition. So.
Yeah, so yesterday one of the other things we talked about was this term God wink, which kind of like the word says is like, it's kind of like God is winking at you, like, I see you, or oh, this is what you should do, or oh, you're looking for answers and here's one for you, right? And another word that's often used for that type of thing is something called a synchronicity, and synchronicity, and it's got talking about stems in there.
Yeah, there you go.
Syn, S-Y-N, which is together, and then chron, which is time. Yeah, so time together. I'm being
quizzed by my GT English teacher in 7th grade, where we would do drills and she would throw candy at us if we got it right. And then that was how we did the drills every day, like for 10 minutes, 15 minutes.
That's fun.
Yeah.
Like candy. Yum. They taste better than gold stars too.
Yeah.
So synchronicity. So I'll just read the definition from Psychology Today. Synchronicity is a phenomenon in which people interpret two separate and seemingly unrelated experiences as being meaningfully intertwined, even though there is no evidence that one led to the other, or that the two events are linked in any other causal way. Sorry. Though many people perceive signs or spiritual meaning in such synchronistic events, most scientists believe that such events are more likely to coincidences that only seem meaningful due to aspects of human thinking, such as confirmation bias. So,
just because it's biased doesn't mean it's any less meaningful.
Yeah, well, that's, as we talked yesterday, right? I was kind of providing the science and data-based back response to some of the things we were talking about when you were talking about spirituality and things that you've started to explore and believe and these signs you start looking for. And I pointed this out yesterday without the fancy term confirmation bias, but just to make sure people are aware of what confirmation bias is. Also from Psychology Today, confirmation bias sorry. Confirmation bias is the tendency for people to believe evidence that confirms their pre-existing beliefs and discount information that counters those beliefs. Seeking to corroborate our beliefs comes naturally, while it feels uncomfortable and counterintuitive to look for evidence that contradicts them. And they give an example here, which is an example of confirmation bias can sometimes be found in anxious individuals. Someone highly sensitive to rejection may interpret ambiguous social cues as confirming their belief that no one likes them.
Oh.
Can you relate to that at all?
I mean, I feel like that's so different from where my mind was going with synchronicity, but I don't know. What was the question again?
I was asking if you could relate to that at all. The example specifically, it's talking about an anxious person who was taking signs that people were doing that as confirmation that nobody likes them.
Oh, I feel like that's not so much my social anxiety or how that would show up in my anxiety. I don't know.
Yeah, well, I mean, no is a perfectly fine answer, so no, not really. Well, anyway, so we're talking about some of the synchronicities that came up. Also, another kind of synonym is a God wink. What were some of the synchronicities that came up yesterday? So we talked about these things on the show, and then throughout the day, you actually sent me most, if not all of them. But why don't you tell us what popped up for you?
Yes. So I feel like there was something else that I was trying to remember, but the Instagram one, basically I open up Instagram and one of the astrology people that I follow had shared something in their stories about root words in elements, I think was what it was. And literally, I have not seen content on Instagram that talks about stem words or root words probably ever. Never. And then literally yesterday, the first time I opened up Instagram, that's in an account that I follow. Like, it wasn't recommended just from like the hashtag or keyword. It was someone who I follow shared it. And I'm like, that's just crazy.
Yeah. And so I put it up on the screen here for those of you who are on video. It was a post by the Gnostic Oracle. Sorry, got something in my throat there. And they were one. They talked about the etymology, which is the study of where words come from, and they break down the word etymology. The etym, according to this, I have not fact checked this, means true sense, and ology means study of. So therefore, the etymology is the study of the true sense of words. So that was one example that came up yesterday.
Yes.
And to point out some of the confirmation bias that may exist, like maybe Danielle has seen many of these posts before, or this types of posts, but she just didn't notice them because she hasn't been thinking about them and they're not popped up in her mind. This is actually kind of related to a topic we talked about with Alexandra last Wednesday, which was the topic of priming. And we also talked about price anchoring there. And just as a quick recap of what that was, is price anchoring is when, say, for example, you're going to buy a house, or let's use a car. It's an easier example. Let's say you're going to buy a car, and we'll pretend that we'll use big numbers just because they're easy. you're going to buy a car for $100,000, and you realistically the price you want to pay is more like 80. And that's something that you could get. But when you go there and the dealer goes in and you see the sticker price, and the sticker price starts out with that MSRP number, which is like $110,000 or something like that. So that's the high anchor. It's getting you thinking like, well, anything that's better than that 110 is going to be good. Even though realistically speaking, the car may only be worth like actually 80 or 85. But by having that higher number, they're anchoring you up there. And then when it's like, oh, well, we can give you a deal, 97, then it's like, oh, you feel like better because it's now been anchored and it's lower than that anchor.
Even though you originally told yourself 80.
Right. And so we talked, so that was last Wednesday's episode, if you want to check that part out. And one of the big takeaways from that was for you to avoid anchoring or to help minimize the effects of it is, especially when you're doing any decision that's going to involve a really high dollar amount or involve a lot of emotion. And we used some examples like a car, a house, and also wanted to point out that it doesn't always have to involve money. It could be other things as well. What in the techniques you can do is to think outside of that pressured environment, especially in the case where there's a salesman or somebody else who can be influencing you. Think before that, or if you need to pause the discussions or whatever, step away and whatnot, and then write down what that number is, and then right below that, why that number is important. And give it meaning and say, okay, here is why we decided this is the number that we want, and have that rational reasoning right there. So then when you're in the discussion making that decision, you can pull out that piece of paper or your phone or whatever to remind yourself, hey, this is the real number, and here's all the reasons why, to help bring you back. So that was one of the techniques that we talked about there. So so that was kind of a recap of yesterday with a couple little extra tidbits added in there as they kind of popped up. So let's go ahead and roll that intro now that we're halfway through the show. That's what we're good
As
at.
always.
Helpful for life. And welcome back. This is What the Hell is Water? I'm Reed Garcia.
And I'm Danielle Garcia.
And I realized that I need to make you one of those fancy little overlays so people can see your name.
It's okay.
It's okay. Blue girl. All right. Well, today our topic is MUSE. You know, this is a fun little acronym that we came up with. And the M stands for menstruation. Which Ryder and I talked about, I think, a couple weeks ago it was a Friday. It was our M's episode. We talked about menstruation, and or it was Thursday or Friday.
I think it was Thursday because it was before the Mindful Moms were on.
Yeah, so on Thursday, we had talked about 4 topics that started with an M, and then later that day, speaking of synchronicities,
exactly.
Later that day, I was in a meeting, and in a meeting, and there was a person in that meeting who was a part of a group or a company called Mindful Mompreneurs. And I was like, all right, I can't let all these M's go by. So we invited them to come on the show the next day. And I don't know so I think we talked about menstruation on the Thursday, and then on the Friday we talked with the Mindful Mompreneurs. And we'll eventually add some links to that in the description for you guys. But anyway, so today we actually have a real live, yep, she's real live woman to ask her opinions on menstruation and some thoughts about that. Then the U stands for ukulele, the S stands for sex, and the E stands for empathy. So a little bit of a combination there. So let's go ahead and just start right at the beginning with menstruation. So when I say menstruation, Danielle, what do you think?
I'm currently menstruating.
That's wonderful.
Yes.
Now, should I feel all awkward and weird about the fact that you just told me that?
No.
No?
I don't think so.
But you're bleeding everywhere. Gross.
No.
Yeah, so I guess, what would you have when you think of menstruation? You have positive thoughts, negative thoughts, kind of indifferent thoughts, kind of where's your head?
Well, I guess first thing I think of is how I recently, within the last 2 years, started tracking my menstrual cycle with the moon cycle. And that's just been very helpful in terms of like tracking my mood over the course of a month. And like last year when I was starting therapy for anxiety again and trying a medication. And then I was like tracking, because the moon is like a physical representation of time passing. Any night you can look up and be like, oh, it's just like a visual representation of, oh, hey, like it's been a month since the last time the moon was that full, and like what has changed over that time. Or it's kind of fun. I started using an app called Stardust, and this might be another tangent, but
Go for it.
But yeah, because I mean, menstrual cycle, moon cycle, they're both M's too, and this is the one and only app I think I may have paid for just outright. It's like $1.99, and it gives you your
what's
like
the name
your
of the app?
Stardust.
Oh, okay.
Yes. And it gives you your like morning horoscope based on your star sign and the moon. And it also gives you your hormone reading for the day based on like how long you've been tracking and how well it knows your menstrual cycle. So, yeah, let's see.
Why'd you like using that?
Why did I like using that app? Well, I feel like once I started tracking like where I was in my cycle and knowing like, okay, 2 days before I start my period, I'm just going to have a really down and depressed day for like no reason. And it makes it better to be like, oh, hey, am I about to start my period in 2 days? Okay, that's why I woke up feeling like I just want to crawl back in bed. Like, I feel like that's once I started tracking symptoms, and like the app has, you can mark like, oh, today there were tears, today there were cramps, today I craved mac and cheese. It actually has that as a button, and that was how I knew that this app was meant for me.
Yeah, well, I think it's a really good thing to be tracking and correlating some things, right?
Mm-hmm.
So one of the things to be careful of course, is the difference between correlation and causation,
Right.
which is something that I don't know that we've talked that much about with Alexandra, but we're going to bring her on and talk about that at some point, because just to define the terms real quick. So correlation is a fancy way of saying that two things like go together, like they are correlated, right?
Mm-hmm. They're trending the same. So like as one gets bigger, then the other gets bigger. Like,
right.
Yeah.
And so whereas causation is something causes another thing. The term kind of cause and effect, like one thing causes another thing, right? So to think of an example off the top of my head that is kind of close to something I've heard at one point, but is not actually true, so kind of made up, is like, wow, the number of drownings, the number of drownings goes, let me put it this way. You are 50 times more likely to drown in the summer than you are in the winter.
Mm-hmm.
Well, that's not necessarily a causation, because it's not because it's summer that you're more likely to drown. It's just
people are more likely to be in pools.
People are more likely to be in pools, more likely to be in oceans and things like that.
Yeah.
So that's, kind of a shaky example off the top of my head, but that's one example where two things correlate, but they don't necessarily cause each other.
Yeah, but so to bring it back to the like the horoscopes, like, so say you wake up and you, like, first thing you do, you check your horoscope, and then the rest of the day you're looking for things that confirm, oh, like my horoscope said I was gonna have someone try and betray me today, so now I'm gonna be looking out for that scoundrel. Like, whereas what I would recommend, both for like noting synchronicities, so you're, maybe like not just being like, oh, I noticed that because something else happened. Like, first thing in the morning, before I check this app, or before you look at your horoscope or whatever, journal about how you're feeling that day, or like
what you're thinking.
What you're thinking about. And so like yesterday morning, like if I had journaled after I did this show, then I would have wrote, oh, we talked about root words, and I hadn't thought about Latin root words in so long, but that was such a big part of like English class in middle school. And then when I saw the thing on Instagram, it was like, I already told myself that was something important that happened this day in my journal. So it's like, it's more, I feel like, at least in my mind, when I'm noticing something, it's because, yeah, I guess it's confirming what I already told myself was important.
Yeah. Well, one thing
meaningful.
I want to, make sure I point out when I'm pointing out the fact that synchronicities, God winks, whatever you want to call them, are possibly a confirmation bias. I'm not saying that means a bad thing, right? I don't think it's a bad thing that you are seeing these things and looking for these things. And we talked about that a little bit yesterday about how you see numbers, right? You have these numbers that are significant to you and you see them. And I didn't mention it yesterday, but sometimes it gets to the point where it's like, oh, yes, oh, 29, great. Oh, 16, great. And then other times it's like, oh, well, if you take 5 times 3 and then you multiply it by the 1 in the middle and then you subtract those 7 and then you multiply by -1 and then imaginary number, then it becomes 29.
That crazy.
It's never that crazy, but it is something like, oh, if you add these two numbers together, then it becomes 5 and then it becomes 29. And then, so yeah. So anyways, my point was that it doesn't necessarily need to be a bad thing that this is subject to confirmation bias or whatnot, especially if what you're trying to focus on are positive things, right? And they are things like, oh, now I'm paying attention to that. So that can be a good thing. It doesn't, just because it's confirmation bias or whatnot does not necessarily mean it's a bad thing. And another thing is, you don't have to necessarily even believe that something can be true or 100% scientific or rational for it to have an effect. We've talked about the placebo effect before, and that's basically, for those who aren't aware, the placebo effect is where something has an effect on you even though there's no causation there. So, for example, the classic example of a placebo effect is when you have a drug trial, you're giving half the people a sugar pill, so it's just like a little capsule that is filled with sugar, so it has negligible effects on the body, and then you give the other half of the group the actual medicine, and you see how people get affected, right? And the placebo effect, if people are taking something and they think it's going to have some effect on them, that literally can have a physiological your body can actually change, even though that didn't actually have any medicine in it. And so it's a
proof of the power of the mind.
A proof of the power of the mind. But yeah, so that is the point of me bringing up the placebo effect is to say is like, hey, even if these things aren't actually signs for you, even if that horoscope is literally just a somewhat broadly written statement by a creative writer to help you find things that may line up with your personality, if you find meaning in those and those, bring you joy and they help you get through the day or whatnot, then great. But the main caution I have, as we were talking about here, is don't let those things define your life and define your day for you. Yeah. And that is true for horoscopes. That's also true for things like these period trackers and these mood trackers. Like, don't just go have a piss poor day because your menstruation app says, hey, your emotions are going to be out of whack today, right?
Right.
But
if you already are noticing, hey, I woke up feeling this way, and then you open your app and you're like, oh, there is a hormonal, like, physical
imbalance going on right now.
Right, yeah. So, like, that is helpful.
Yeah.
And I guess I feel like talking back to menstruation, a thought that it makes me think of, I'm like, I feel like I've been very blessed with my menstrual cycle and how it is regular to the point where I can track what I've been tracking and feel like I can get these insights about what exactly is going on in my cycle, like in my body at that moment.
And that's the nice thing about living in 2021, where, at a touch of a button and you can enter the things. And it's also worth noting that, as an average woman, there's, your menstruation can range, right? It can be, oh, maybe I have just one. Some people don't have a period, right? And especially if they're on birth control or something like that, or they're on some medicine that may cause that to not happen, you may not have a period. And some people have a period that lasts as like 5 days. What's the?
7 is probably the upper range, and then based on like if you're changing birth control or any other hormonal changes, like sometimes you can have periods for half the month, 1 month, and like there's a lot of factors that can affect exactly like what's going on in your cycle. So
and so that's another nice thing about using an app or a tracker or something like this, is that you can put your information in there, and also you can start to have a little bit of data, about how it is, and is it changing, and is it regular? And of course, if you're someone who's actively sexual with a male and pregnancy is a possibility, that's another benefit to know, all right, what part of my period am I on, so I know when my egg could be fertilized by a sperm, so make sure I don't get pregnant.
Yeah, which I guess jumping ahead a little bit to sex, but like that's one of the things that I think is so messed up about sex education in this country, is that we focus so much on don't get pregnant, like fear of getting pregnant. And actually, like if we taught people how their bodies work and how to get pregnant and the circumstances that must be in place in order for a successful pregnancy, then people would automatically know, how to avoid that. Whereas, yeah, I just think it's kind of taught a little backwards.
Yeah.
And then people think like it's way easier to get pregnant than it is sometimes.
Yeah.
I mean,
like, I'm having sex every day. It's like, well, you're not having sex during the right time.
Yeah, that 5-day window that you're fertile a month, then yeah.
Yeah, and that's the thing. Is like, it is kind of sad that those things aren't better taught, and that's why Helpful for Life is here. We're here to make up for where education systems fail, or if you're way out of the education system. It's a important thing to know a little bit about your body and also the body of the opposite sex and how they work, so you can better know, hey, I really want to hit that, but that's in that 5-day window. I'm gonna wait.
Oh my gosh, this is getting danger,
huh? Are we making you uncomfortable yet, Danielle?
Oh,
That's what the U really stands for. Uncomfortable.
Oh, yes. There you go.
Well, so the last thing I wanted to say, menstruation, and kind of tied in with the horoscope apps and things like that, was depending on who you are and what you have going on in your life, it may be actually more important for you to look at these types of things earlier on in the day to help you accommodate and plan. So, for example, say you have some sort of chronic illness where you get tired really easily, or you get emotional really easy, or you have some sort of mental imbalance, which, by the way, like a big thing we want to make sure to talk about here in Helpful Life, like these mental things, like these mental illnesses, like it's a spectrum. Like you're not, with some things it's like a 1 or a 0, it's on or it's off, but with other things it's not. It's like, oh yeah, you are a little bit depressed, or oh yeah, you are a little bit anxious, and you're more likely to get anxious, you're more likely to get depressed, not like you are or you aren't. So just want to make sure we're clear on that. But say you're somebody who has, for example, clinical depression, and it's like this is something is going to be around at least for a very long time, if not forever. It can be useful to kind of track and know, like, hey, all right now, this week, I'm in a bit of a depressed state. And so that can help me know, all right, maybe I'm not going to go and give that, joyous speech for my company this week. Maybe I'm going to wait till next week. Maybe I'm not going to plan all my social events today. I have all these meetings, and at the end of the day, I'm going to go and do that happy hour. Well, maybe today is not the day to do that because I have, this condition that I'm now aware of. So that's one thing I wanted to point out. It can be more useful if you have these kind of conditions or whatnot. And then, any other thoughts on that?
No, I think that's enough on that for today.
Dried out the menstruation. All right, cool. The very last thing was talking about, kind of like weight. It's not looking at the trends more so than the individual data point. I think can be a little more important. So for example, it's okay if you weigh yourself every day, but don't pay that much attention to that exact number because it's going to fluctuate. But if you see the general trends, like, okay, over weeks, over months, it's going up, it's going down, that can be a little more useful. Same kind of thing with the period app or whatnot. You can see the trends over time versus specifically like this is this one data point from today. Mm-hmm. So let's go ahead and move over to the uterus. That was another U I wrote down, which is kind of related to menstruation. But no, actually today we were going to talk about ukulele. So why don't you tell us a little bit about what ukulele means to you and how actually, real quick, let's highlight some of our viewer comments that we've got today. When we're talking about correlation and causation, we have Casey in the chat who says that ice cream sales and homicide rate is her favorite example of of the correlation but not causation. And then she also wanted to highlight that fear of sex, not fear of getting pregnant. And so, yes, that certainly an interesting topic when it comes to sex ed, right? So moving over to the ukulele, Danielle, first off, what was your first exposure to ukulele, and why, did you like it, and what got you started on it, and what are you doing with it right now?
I really don't remember my like first exposure, but I started learning last summer because oh gosh, I can't even remember why I originally decided to, but I was like looking at ukuleles on Amazon because
I was gonna say, was it you just wanted to win or wanted to play an instrument, and then you found out you could buy a ukulele for $20?
yeah, and I feel like it's only 4 strings, so it's like easier in my mind to learn than
And
something
smaller
with 6
and
strings.
easier to hold.
Yeah, and I got a really cute little aqua colored one. So yeah, let's see. Ooh.
For our audio listeners, Danielle's holding up her blue ukulele, which is a nice color that kind of coordinates with her hair. And hand me your cup.
Oh.
And hold up your nails.
Oh yes.
And
Nails.
often her eyeliner colors.
Oh yeah, I didn't do that
And
today.
grab that.
Oh yeah.
Her water cup.
I have a theme.
There's a little bit of a theme here.
This was also the color of my childhood bedroom once I could pick the color, and then we repainted it when I was in 4th grade from my room that was previously fairies, which was also a very nice bedroom theme.
See, you had magic in your life even before
See,
you got into the mystical world.
Yes.
So this aquamarine, is that a fair color?
Yes, that's what I just have decided to call my favorite color.
I like it. So ukulele. So you sometime last summer you decided that you for whatever reason, which you can't really remember, you wanted to maybe start playing an instrument. You liked that Taylor Swift played the guitar, but you're like, I don't know, guitar is kind of big and it's got all these 6 strings.
She also plays the ukulele.
Oh, there you go.
Yeah, she plays like over 20 instruments. Okay.
Wow. Okay. All right.
Yeah.
Hashtag Taylor
So it's
Flex.
like a thing like when she writes a song, oh, did you write that song on the guitar or the piano? Like what was its first sound? Like
yeah,
anyways.
that's cool. So then you looked on Amazon, saw you could get one for like $20.
Yep.
So you bought one.
Yep.
And then as soon as you got it, you immediately started practicing, and you've been practicing and playing every day since.
I immediately started learning Rhiannon last summer because I'm like, I don't want to do the drills or like learn the chords. I just want to learn it song by song. And that's another thing that I wanted to do with learning an instrument was not look up anything about a program for how to learn the ukulele. If I was just going to sit down and be like, how do I want to learn the ukulele? And so that's another thing that I realized after last summer, I cut my nails so that I could like play it like you're supposed to, like from the bottom up.
Yeah, so the way, for those who are audio only, let me describe. So when you're holding a guitar, let's say you're right-handed, your left hand is what's on called the neck of the guitar. And I'm using a guitar, a ukulele is similar as a guitar, just smaller and only 4 strings. And with your left hand, you press down on a string. And then with your right hand, you strum with your thumb. Or with a pick, or you can use your fingers to kind of pick. But basically, you move your fingers across the string to vibrate the string, and then based on where you hold the string down with your left hand, it plays a different note. So if you play like at what's called an open, where you're not pressing anything down, just do one string. Just do one string. So you got that note, and it's kind of got that pitch. And then if you hold it down further, closer towards, there you go. So it's a little higher pitched. So because she's now holding it down and making that string shorter, it gives it a higher frequency, makes it have a higher pitch. So the way you're supposed to hold it is with your fingers pointing towards the sky, and the neck of the guitar, the ukulele, kind of rests in between your thumb and your first finger. So that's how you're supposed to hold and play a guitar.
Yes, but then
or a ukulele.
But then after I cut my nails and like practiced for like 20 minutes, and then I already had like calluses forming on the pads of my fingers. And so this year when I decided I'm going to pick the ukulele back up, I'm just going to learn how to play it from the top down with like just flat fingers like this. So because realistically, I want to keep my nails how I want to keep my nails. I don't want to have to cut them to play the ukulele. So, and then whenever I go to learn a song, if it has too many chords, we say,
Danielle is mouthing bad words because she already used up her
No,
allocation
that was
yesterday.
yesterday. I still got one for today.
She's holding it just in case she needs
I
it later
know.
on the show. Yeah, so she was saying F it if you know.
Yeah.
And it's of course is quite the contrast and the balance that we have in our marriage between Danielle, who's like, I'm gonna do it however the heck I want to do it, and there's Reed,
Exactly.
who's like, I'm gonna find out the way to do it that's best, most efficient, all of those types of things.
Yeah, I'm sure it's painful for you to sit over there and watch me like play the ukulele how I want to play the ukulele, but there you go.
Yeah. Well, you know what? The most important thing is that you're doing it now, right? And this
Yeah.
is the first instrument besides the recorder in fourth grade, probably, that
Yep.
you probably learned to play Titanic on. Other than that,
Possibly.
this is the first instrument that you've ever played in your life. And so
Other
that's
than my voice.
other than your
My
voice,
vocal
the
cords.
instrument of your voice.
It's
Yeah.
an instrument.
And so that was what got you playing the ukulele. And I guess your main point is you decided, kind of like with journaling, right? There's plenty of people out there who say, oh, you should do this. You need to carve out this part of your day. You need to be this much time and make sure you do it every day and establish that habit, blah, blah, blah. Well, with you, you're kind of like, hey, screw you guys. I'm going to do it how I want, and so that's good because the important thing is that you're doing the thing, right? Now, I, as your coach and your teacher of everything else, right? I will say, I think in the long run, it's better to learn some of the right tips because you can build up bad habits, which are hard to unlearn and things like that.
Are they really bad habits if you like aren't hurting anyone, or like it doesn't really matter if all you want to do is play songs with 3 chords?
But there you go.
There you go.
And there you go. And who knows, maybe you will discover a brand new technique that actually is better in some way. So, there you go. All right. Well, she started playing the ukulele. Any other things that you'd like to share about the ukulele, or think we've got that one in the bag?
Just that now I'm considering sharing one of my audio recordings.
Oh, wow. Maybe we'll have to have a live premiere tomorrow with it.
Maybe.
Wow. So if you guys are either here live or listening after the fact, you guys can come and hear one of Danielle's. What exactly is it?
Well, I don't know. So I also wanted to learn an instrument so that I could record a cover album for the Taylor Swift album that my novel is based on. And then I'm going to change some of the lyrics to like fit my stories better. So yeah, that would be fun.
Yeah. Well, tomorrow, at least one of the recordings I know you have is when you were practicing a song. Which song was it?
It was Wildest Dreams.
So a song, Wildest Dreams, which is by
Taylor Swift.
Wow, Taylor Swift.
Yeah.
Didn't you like Taylor Swift?
Yeah.
Oh man.
Love her.
But it was like one of your times where you were practicing and you were learning the song, and it was your.
It was like the first time that I'd recorded myself like trying to play a song all the way through.
Yeah, and you had, up to that point you'd put in what, like single digits of hours playing. Mm-hmm. Yeah, not even 10 hours. And so you're just like, all right, I'm just going to try this thing. I've never done it before, never had any formal training. Maybe looked up a couple things online of chords to make. And then you looked up the chords for that song. You're just like, all right, I'm going to play this through and we'll see.
Yeah. And I cuss.
Yeah, and she cusses. There you go. And just a little teaser on how Danielle is going to eventually release an album on Spotify. So we'll share some more with you guys about that process and how she does that, because that's one of the things we really want to encourage with Helpful for Life and on the show, is that you can do these things that may seem way far out there or stretch or whatnot, and it doesn't matter how good or bad you are, but if you want to publish a book or if you want to publish an album or whatnot, you can. And it's not as hard as you might think. And that's the beauty of living in 2021, is these things have gotten easier and easier to self-publish. All right. Any last thoughts on the ukulele before we move on to sex?
No.
Cool. Well, let's talk about sex, baby. All right. So when we're talking about sex,
I'm very curious where you're going to go.
Well, I was about to ask you, what angle would you like to take on sex?
Oh, I don't know.
You want to start from the top? You want to start from the bottom? From the front? Which way would you like to attack this problem?
Nothing,
huh? Okay, well let's talk about sex in marriages. How about that? And how, especially in America, the trend seems to be, hey, once you get married, you're never gonna have sex again. So just get used to that fact and accept it. What are your thoughts when someone says that?
Yeah, I feel like that is kind of this bad rap that marriage gets. And yeah, a very common belief or like phrase that you actually hear people say. So
Yeah, and I also always wonder if that's one of those things where because people hear it all the time and, from their friends, their family, from TV shows and movies and things like that, that it's become so ingrained, whereas people are actually more likely to accept that as like okay or the norm just because they've kind of been used to it. So, is it causing it maybe even in some ways? But yeah, I think my main stance on it is that's not how it has to be, and that sex is an amazing thing, and that it's easy to forget all of the things that sex can do because it's one, as you're having sex, it releases chemicals in your brain, which makes you feel certain ways. And then there's also the aspect of if you're doing this act with somebody else, you are having some sort of interaction, which releases different types of chemicals and can also make you think and feel certain things. And it can help you feel confident and good about yourself. But that's another thing. There's a lot of sources of shame and embarrassment that people have when it comes to sex. Any thoughts on any of that?
Yeah, well, I think that brings up, I guess, something else that I've thought about in the past is like how we're taught, like, oh, like sex is bad to do outside of marriage. Sex is shameful. Like, don't think about sex. Don't touch yourself. Don't masturbate. Like, don't, like, I just feel like there's a lot of shame around it. And then once you get married, you're just supposed to be like, oh, this person who knows how to have a lot of good sex. Like, and you don't if you weren't practicing.
Yeah. No, that's the thing is like how, I mean, sex is like anything else that you do. Like you can get better by learning a little bit more about it, learning different ways to do it, things that you can do, shouldn't do, and, random things like, for example, if you want to have sex in the pool, which seems like all hot and steamy on the shows and movies and things like that, which can be fun, or in the ocean or whatnot. Oh, well, guess what? All of that water actually washes away a lot of the natural lubrication that the vagina produces and can make the sex not quite as pleasurable as it might look on the show. Or if you're having sex on a beach, there's a reality that there's a lot of sand around, and sand is kind of coarse and can
Just kind of.
when you have two surfaces moving against one another, if you put some sand in between, it's like sandpaper, which is not necessarily pleasant. So if you're going to go have sex on a beach, take some precautions to minimize the amount of sand spread because it could get real uncomfortable really fast. But yeah, those are just a couple of really quick examples of some things that you might not know or you might not learn because guess what? Where do people mostly learn about sex these days? Well, you got your sex education back in, I don't know, 4th grade through 10th grade, maybe. Mm-hmm. And I don't remember what exactly I learned or didn't learn, but I think it's mostly very like health oriented, and it was like,
yeah,
here's
like I feel
sperm,
like you
here's
learned
the
a lot
egg.
about like periods, like the girls and guys were separated, and then the girls learned about periods and stuff, and then also like don't have sex, and then the boys learned about, I don't know, wet dreams. What did you learn about?
Yeah, probably wet dreams and morning wood, maybe.
Mm.
The important things. And oh yeah, don't ever have sex. We'll probably learn that one too. And so you learn a little bit from that through a certain lens, right? That's presented to you by the school, filtered through what all the parents like to complain about, like, oh, don't teach my kids about sex. I need to teach them more about the Bible or whatnot. And then the other place people learn about sex is TV, movies, porn. Yeah. And they go and see these things and think that's what sex is. And the short answer is that's one way sex can be. And those are some of the things that have sex, but also people are acting, and those are all shows and things for entertainment. So it's not necessarily a reality. Another fun little tidbit about sex was, hey, if you don't use the condom, you're having safe sex with a monogamous partner or whatever, you've got tested and you decide to not use a condom. Well, you're gonna have to clean up a little bit after sex because that's the semen's got to go somewhere. Mm-hmm. And it's just like, that's one of those things that mom probably didn't tell you in your birds and the bees conversation when you were 5 years old. Not 5 years old. That might be a little young, but in 5th grade, I think was what I was more thinking about. Well, any other sex things to talk about for our Muse Day?
No, I think that's a good smattering of sex topics for one day.
You finished? Good. All right. So the E is empathy. So empathy, Danielle, when I say empathy, what do you think about?
Me.
Nice. No, I think that's a good thing. And why is that?
Well, at least I like to think I'm empathetic. but I'm always,
Actually, hold on. Before you answer that,
yeah.
why don't you define what empathy is?
Yeah. So, and it's one of those words where I feel like, oh, I've just come to think I understand it so well. I'm like, crap, what is the definition? Like,
Well, I can read one here for you.
okay, that would be
this
helpful.
is just from a quick Google search using their dictionary, which is Oxford Languages. Empathy: the ability to understand and share the feelings of another. And another word that's often heard that's kind of similar is sympathy.
Mm-hmm.
And sympathy, from that same dictionary, is first definition is feeling of pity and sorrow for somebody else's misfortune. And the second one is understanding between people, a common feeling.
Mm-hmm.
And so, what do you think about the difference between empathy and sympathy?
Yeah. So I think when I think of sympathy, I think, either you are commiserating because you've been there and you have felt the same feelings, or that, I guess, that feeling of sorry but not truly understanding, whereas empathy is the ability to understand the feelings and feel them even though you may not have experienced the same situation before, like being able to put yourself in someone else's shoes. And I guess for me, it's like an intentional, mindful act of like trying to understand how someone else is feeling.
Yeah.
Just by like thinking about like, what would that be like if I were experiencing that, even though I haven't experienced it myself.
Yeah. So from psychmc.com, they talk about sympathy, they say sympathy involves understanding from your own perspective. Empathy involves putting yourself in the other person's shoes and understanding why they may have these particular feelings.
Mm-hmm. Perspective taking, I think, is a good term that I don't know if I've talked about with empathy before, but yeah, like I think that's a big part of it too, is like you don't have to personally agree or maybe even personally understand in order to be able to think like, oh, from this person's perspective and their past experiences and their beliefs, like I can get why they would be feeling that way. Or I don't know if that.
Yeah, no, to elaborate on that a little bit, this has been a big thing for me, especially as I've been talking with friends and hearing what they're going through and things like that. And especially one of the things that I've really benefited from is some of my friends who've gone through a lot of therapy. And I've learned a lot through them because they're able to use these terms and talk about things in a way where they just having the language and knowledge about these things enables you to, one, better understand them, and two, to better talk about them and to better share them with others. And so that's one phrase I heard someone tell me even just last week was like, hey, because I'm sitting here, I always have my rational, logical brain on, and feelings are definitely not always logical or rational. And so that was something, someone was talking with me, they were struggling, they were kind of spiraling out a little bit. And actually they were kind of lashing out at me a little bit, which was not fair to me. But I all right, I understood, like, okay, this is not about me right now. This is about something that they're going through. And right now what they're saying, that is not logical. Like they think the whole world's against them. But I tried to put myself in their shoes and be like, okay, all right, hearing what they're saying and imagining what it would be like to be in their shoes and have all of these things happening at me. And oh, by the way, I also know that this person has these other things that are these kind of conditions that make them more likely to be triggered by these events. Okay, I can see, and I can also picture them in my head and see how emotional they are right now and how frustrated they are right now. And I'm trying to imagine what that might be like. And that's been a big thing for me over the last couple of years, as I've been doing a lot of this solo entrepreneur stuff. I've kind of found myself saying multiple times over the last 6 months, especially, like, I've felt more feelings in the last year than I had in the previous 29 years combined. And some of that's because I've started to become a little bit more aware, and I've done some learning and training and understanding. And some of that's also because of environment. I grew up living a pretty blessed life. I grew up in an upper middle class suburb in our family did well. I never had any large things negative happen to me, and I went to a great school and I got scholarships. I did very well, and I graduated school with a job and no debt, and I had a great stable job. Got paid lots of money, all great things. However, when you quit your job and you go to start a company, you start to subject yourself to all sorts of different things in a different environment and different situation and less stability. And then maybe you decide, hey, it might be a good idea to try and, I don't know, live in an RV full time and travel around the U.S.
Constant decision fatigue.
While you're trying to start a company at the same time. These are all great things, but putting myself into those situations added a whole bunch more stressors and a whole lot more uncertainty and things like that, which led to a whole different wave of feelings that I'd never felt before. And also, to be frank, I started using some drugs, and those started to affect the way that I felt during those times. So, for example, one drug that I did was ecstasy, and not something I've done a lot. I've done it a couple of times in a recreational manner. And what ecstasy does is it releases a bunch of serotonin in your head, which is one of these brain chemicals, and it makes you feel good. And one of the downsides of serotonin, or downside of ecstasy, is it just floods your brain with serotonin, makes you feel good, makes you have a great time. However, a day or a couple days later, your body, as it's starting to get back to equilibrium, get back to normal, it kind of is lacking in that serotonin. And so it can actually lead you to feel kind of down, kind of depressed. And there's some phrase like the
come down,
the come down. There's like a depressed Monday or something like that, or Tuesday. I can't remember the exact phrase, but there's something like that where it's like, oh, okay, recognize like, hey, if you're going to do this thing, you're going to have that great time that day. Just recognize that on that other day, you're probably going to be feeling a little bad. And that's good to know, because it's like, hey, I'm feeling bad today. I know I'm going to be feeling bad. It helps you frame and expect that. And so after the first time I used ecstasy, or maybe the second time, I had a really bad day that during that Monday or Tuesday afterwards. And I was like, oh, okay. And that was the first time in my life I had ever been like, okay, I'm not in a good mood. And I recognize that I'm not in a good mood, and nothing I'm doing is changing that mood. And I'm like, well, that's what it's like to be depressed. Is like, I know that I'm sad, and I can even see that I'm sad and recognize that I'm trying to make myself not sad, but I still feel that way. And so, I don't know, that's one of the things about drugs, using them in a safe and smart way, that I actually really like. It can help expand the way people think and feel, and can also help them become more sympathetic towards other people, because depression isn't something up to that point I had experienced at all. And now, having done the entrepreneur thing, I've had other senses of that, based off of, just trying to be a solo entrepreneur. But that was the first time where I kind of really started to understand a little bit of what that was like. Helped me feel a little bit of empathy for these people. So real quick, I wanted to point out, since we were talking about sympathy and empathy and STEM words, if you look at the etymology, the science of the word for empathy, it's derived from ancient Greek, empathia, which means the physical affection or passion, which comes from, these are kind of Greek stems, but it's en, which is like in or at, and pathos, which is like passion or suffering. And one of the thing within this lovely Wikipedia definition is talking about empathy is the capacity to understand or feel what another person is experiencing from within their frame of reference. That is the capacity to place oneself in another position, or to use a popular phrase, put yourself in someone else's shoes. So that's that empathy. And then whereas the sympathy is the sim, that part means together, right? And so that's like, hey, I have this understanding, I feel with you, but I'm not necessarily putting myself into your shoes and thinking about or feeling what it might be like. So one of the downsides or trouble of being empathetic is, especially if you're super, super empathetic, is it can be a little bit like a sponge. And you can kind of absorb a little bit of some feelings. Talk a little bit about that, Danielle.
Yeah. Well, I feel like, I guess you don't necessarily think about just how many different people you might come into contact throughout one day. Like you have a couple friends who are texting you, or a family member calls you and you run out to a store and some random stranger tells you like this really heavy like life story, which I don't know if that happens to everyone, but it seems to happen to me a lot. And then you just realize like, oh man, so now like I'm thinking about this friend and like what are they feeling and how can I help them in their situation, and what's going on with this family member, and how can I reach out and be a better like family member to them. And then you start and then at least for myself, I'm like, oh man, now I'm realizing I'm having all of these feelings and I don't even know if they're necessarily mine or if they're even necessarily the feelings of the other people, or if I'm just like writing these stories for everyone based on like my reactions. And it's, you just realize like, okay, one of the journaling prompts I use is, what emotions are mine right now? Like, what am I feeling that's not based on the experience of someone else?
Yeah, I think that's a really powerful journaling prompt. So if you are somebody who experiences a lot of emotions, and especially if you're somebody who talks with multiple people or even one person and dealing with their problems and their struggles, especially if it's someone who's going through a tough time, right? Maybe it's someone who's going through a divorce or some sort of fight with a friend or a sibling or in-law or whatever it may be. Maybe someone's lost their job. Maybe they're whatever. There's an infinite number of things that could be going on in someone's life. But if you're around somebody who's dealing with all that kind of stuff, that's an important thing to check in with yourself and see what it is that you're feeling, what is it that your thoughts are, to make sure that, one, you protect yourself and make sure you don't stretch yourself too far, because that can be one of the downsides is like, all right, if I'm helping all of these people, but it's causing me to be a shell of myself, then maybe I'm doing too much, right? And to use the classic example of, all right, make sure you're putting your oxygen mask on first before you put the oxygen mask on the people around you when it's talking about the emergency situation on a plane. And so that's one thing you got to be a little bit careful of with empathy. Like, empathy is a very important thing, and it's something that I know from talking with you, and obviously because you're my wife, empathy is extremely important to you, and it's something that you're looking to spread in the world, and that's something that you're trying to do through your work, through your writing, and other things, and helping people to understand a little bit more and to put themselves in other people's shoes. And especially in America, but really worldwide, I think 2021 is a great time for people to be a little more empathetic and try and put themselves a little bit more in other people's shoes. When it comes to things like coronavirus and masks and vaccines and things like that, and hey, like maybe those are choices I decided not to do for myself, but I'm going to put myself in that other person's shoes and say, hey, well, maybe that person at the grocery store who's next to me and is trying to keep their distance, well, maybe they have some kind of condition, or they are around their elderly parents, or around someone who is very at risk to get seriously ill or die from coronavirus. And so therefore, even though I think masks and vaccines are dumb and stupid, I'm going to keep my distance out of respect for them and their feelings, because I recognize that they might not be feeling very safe. They might not be feeling very comfortable when I get close to them. So that's just a modern day example of when empathy could come in. And another one is, looking at all the news and the headlines and social media where everyone's always yelling at each other and disagreeing and all that kind of stuff. It's like, well, actually, if you take a second to understand and put yourself in the other person's shoes a little bit more, to see and understand a little deeper about why the people are thinking that way, or why that political party does things that way, you'll actually maybe find out like, hey, believe it or not, we're kind of trying for the same thing, or at least a similar thing, but we're just going about it in a different way. And so I'll bring up the book again because I think it's a very valuable one, and that's Why Good People Disagree About Politics and Religion. And let me confirm that title. But that is, Why Good People Are Divided by Politics and Religion, by Jonathan Haidt. That's another really instrumental book for me, and I highly recommend it. The actual title is The Righteous Mind, and Why Good People Are Divided by Politics and Religion is the subtitle. And it talks about that, and it's like, hey, Democrats and Republicans, and they talk about a lot of other things too, right? But Democrats and Republicans are doing this they both want a greater good for the society. They're both trying to achieve these things, but just the way they're going about it is a little bit different. And if, people spend a little less time yelling at each other angrily at the surface level and starting to put themselves in the other person's shoes to understand a little better, then maybe we could all do something a little better. So I think empathy is a very important thing, especially as we're heading into the holiday season, or we're in the middle of the holiday season, but especially as we go into Christmas and things like that, as you guys go to have this interaction with family and friends, things like that, keep this empathy in mind. And maybe you need to kind of rewatch this episode or this segment before you go to help get yourself in that right mind space and say like, well, Uncle Bobby is an angry drunk, and I'm going to try and put myself in his shoes and see all the things that he's going through and understand, like, all right, when he's lashing out, it's not at me personally, it's because all the stuff he's going through, or oh, maybe my mother-in-law is, overbearing and is bothering me and has all these issues, and it makes me feel bad, but maybe I like have a little bit of understanding to see why it is they're doing and what's going on with them. And also, again, maybe it has literally nothing to do with me. So there's a couple of other things. Any other thoughts on empathy for today?
Sometimes with empathy, you just have to say, not my circus, not my monkeys. And one of my mantras that I repeat to myself sometimes is, ultimately, I am not responsible for the emotions of others.
Nor can you control them.
Yeah.
Which is a very important thing to say. So say that one more time.
I am not responsible for the emotions of others.
So maybe that's something you really needed to hear. And by the way, this is independent of if you're a man or a woman or any of these things. These are all very valuable. But I would say especially... I can imagine a lot of moms, especially in America, like that seems to be a common theme, but also just I think moms in general, that dealing with the feelings and expectations and thoughts of everyone in the family, and helping to take on those emotions themselves and be empathetic towards their kids and things like that. So especially as we're going into these hectic holiday times where you've got to be hosting and you're buying gifts and all this kind of stuff. You have all this pressure from all these different people. You got to get your house ready before people come into town, all that kind of stuff. It can be really hectic. It can be really overwhelming. So making sure that you remember, it's even if they happen to be your monkeys by blood, you can't control those monkeys as much as you would like to. So make sure you keep that in mind and don't stretch yourself too far, because if you break, then that's not good for anybody, right? So make sure you're keeping care of yourself. Any other thoughts on empathy for today? No? Okay. Well, I will wanted to end with one last comment to highlight from one of our audience members. One of the things you can do, especially if you find yourself not feeling in a great mood, is you can find some fun things to do related to aquamarine. And so Danielle wanted to highlight, or not Danielle, Libby wanted to highlight that it's also the same color of our frame on the video.
Yes.
We've got this blue everywhere.
And the chat box.
And the chat box is also that same blue. So yes, it is a good color, and it's a fun one to have, and is now everywhere in your life. That's for sure. Well, Danielle, are there any challenges that popped to mind after we had our discussion on MUSE today? I'll just give a quick recap. So we talked with our MUSE. So the M was menstruation. And as I mentioned earlier, we had a discussion a couple of Thursdays ago with Ryder and myself where we talked about menstruation and a couple of other things that started with M. And then today we talked about it with Danielle, and she gave us a little bit of information on menstruation. We talked a little bit about how much they can vary. She talked about an app. There's multiple ones out there, but the one that she uses is called Stardust, which tracks your period. Also is related to the moon cycles.
The moon cycle.
Yeah. And we talked about the importance of, you can take that information and you can use that to help understand and help explain the things. And another phrase that I've used before, we talked about last Thursday with Eric, an explanation, not an excuse. So that's another thing that popped in my head as we were talking about that. You're looking at your horoscope, you're looking at your period tracking or whatnot. You're tracking your feelings. Like you can say, oh, all right, I realized that this happened because of ABC, but I'm not using that as an excuse, right? And there's a fine line there. So you can check in on last Thursday to see a little bit more about that. And then we talked about you, which was ukulele. And Danielle gave us a little bit about how she started the ukulele and how she decided to say F it and learn how she was going to, even if it meant holding the ukulele the wrong way. And the way she learned wasn't by practicing notes or chords or things like that, but it was just jumping right into the songs that she wanted to learn. And when she saw, okay, this chord, I need to know these 3 chords to play the song Rhiannon by Fleetwood Mac. And then she later started to do some Taylor Swift stuff, which we may end up playing for you guys tomorrow, so make sure to come back for that. And then the S was sex. And so I tried as much as I could, not as much as I could, but I did try to say some things to make Danielle uncomfortable to see how much she would squirm, but she held up pretty good. So we talked a little bit about sex education and tied that into menstruation and, how recognizing how you can only get pregnant within a certain window of a woman's cycle. And we're just kind of had some general conversation about how we encourage people to have more sex and be more aware of their body and understand their body. And masturbation is an okay thing for people to understand and explain and know what works for them so they can, do more and better things when they're...
Or tell a partner what you want.
Or tell a partner what you want or don't want. And recognizing that, hey, TV shows, movies, porn, those are just one version of what sex can be. And also they're all for entertainment and for a certain purpose. So it may not be the most accurate lens to look through. So that's some of the things we talked about with sex. And then we ended up talking about empathy. And Danielle talked about what empathy meant to her. We defined the difference between empathy and sympathy. And they're both important, by the way. I don't know if we emphasize that sympathy is still a very important thing to do. And there are also times where, try as you might, you just cannot put yourself in the other person's shoes. And sometimes that's because you've never felt anything close to that before. And that's also worth recognizing. And I find myself saying that a lot in some of my conversations with my friends. I'm like, I'm not going to pretend to understand what it's like to be going through that. Like, I don't have kids, or I'm not going through a divorce, or I've never had any issues with my parents or siblings in that way. So I'm not going to pretend to know what that's like, but that really must suck. And I think that's an okay thing to say. Just acknowledging, like, look, there's no way for me to even get an ounce of what you are feeling, but I see you, I hear you, and I'm sorry, and that sucks. And sometimes that's all you can say, and sometimes that's all people need to hear. So that was our muse for today. Did you have any challenge, or would you like for me to have one?
Go for it.
Go for it. Okay. So I think the challenge for you guys today is see how you can apply empathy in your life today. Why don't you, as you're going through your day-to-day, if you have a conversation with somebody or you think about somebody, or maybe as we were talking about empathy, a certain situation or a certain person popped into your head, where is a time or a place where you could show a little bit more empathy, you could practice a little bit more empathy, and you could try and dig a little deeper, try and put yourself in that other person's shoes. And maybe there's someone in your life who is going through something, and this would be a good time, this could be a good trigger for you to reach out to them and be like, you could even say like, hey, look, I know we talked about this last week, but I don't think I really pushed deep enough. Like, how is that divorce going? Like, that must be really tough. Like, can you want to tell me a little bit more about how that's making you feel and things that are going on? Or, oh wow, you know what, I realized that, yeah, your sister died this month, or this week, a year ago or 10 years ago. Like, what's it like for that to come up? Or, hey, oh, you're raising kids and your parents aren't around. Like, is that tough? Like, what do you think about? So here's just a couple of prompts for you guys. Like, just especially if it's something that is way different than anything you've ever thought or felt, that's a perfect time to try and learn a little bit more. And one, that's valuable to them, but it's also valuable to you because you get to learn a little bit more. You get to understand a little bit more and kind of maybe move a little bit closer towards wondering or towards understanding what's going on in people's heads and in people's hearts. And the more empathetic you are, the easier it is for you to not make snap judgments and not to instantly be like, why do you do that? And you're like, oh, that person cut me off in traffic. Well, who knows how their day's going? Who knows what just happened to them, right? So practice a little bit of empathy today. And then also this is an ongoing challenge for the rest of the year. Make sure to take this empathy into the holidays with you because I think we all could use a little bit of empathy, especially in the stressful COVID times and all that kind of stuff. All right. Any other things, or is that it for you?
I think that's it.
Well, that's all, folks.